Okay, so we're going to talk tonight about sustainable development, how it's going to affect housing, some of the new housing policies that are coming down the pipe, and energy use and retrofits here in British Columbia. I'm going to try and cover a lot of stuff tonight, and that's because I know that we have a lot of new people here, and that was the goal, is to bring in people who haven't been to any of our previous presentations. So really quickly, my name is Jeff Seisser. I was born here in Kamloops, BC, lived here for about 24 years. There was a time when I actually traveled around, lived in Alberta, spent a lot of time overseas. I've seen quite a bit of the world, and I'm a very proud Canadian, and I feel very lucky to live here in Canada. I think we have an amazing place here. So tonight I'm going to talk about sustainable development, housing. We'll talk about the Alterations code. We'll talk about something called the PACE program, which is how the government wants us to pay for those alterations. We'll have a little bit of a deep dive into BC Hydro to see how we're going to power all of this. And we'll look at the economic forecast, and if we got time, we'll talk about some solutions at the end. I'm talking kind of fast here because I'm trying to run this through, because at the end of this, what we want to do is open this up to open questions for the audience. So there's at least a half hour, and we want to do a meet and greet so you get a chance to talk to people in person at the open house. So some of the ideas that we're going to talk about here tonight, they're a little bit complicated. They sound really simple, but it's the way that the arguments are being framed we have to pay attention to. There is nuance there. So there's always a reason for everything, but we have to put it in context. The context is the most important thing, and I'll give you an example. If I bump my finger and my finger hurts and I go to the doctor and I say, "Hey doc, my finger's sore," and he says, "Oh, I've got the solution for you." With no context, he cuts off my arm, okay? First order solution, he's solved the problem, he's fixed my sore finger. But second order result is I have no arm, okay? That's not in context. That's not the solution I wanted. I could have just taken an aspirin and I would have been fine. Okay, so technically he did the right thing, but it was out of context. We also want to have this other idea and think about as a teaspoon of sugar with a drop of cyanide. So I can give you an idea and it can sound really good, and there can be 10 things on that piece of paper or in that plan or that environmental plan that are actually really good for you and you agree with, but there might be that one thing in there, that one drop of cyanide, that's going to cause you a whole lot of problems, or in the end it could kill you. You could eat that sugar, it's going to taste sweet, but it's still going to hurt you in the end. So sustainable development, this is what I used to think it was. I used to think it just meant that we're going to do things, develop things in a way that is good for the environment. Very simple concept. It's about clean water, not using up too much of our resources. But I think we need to go a little bit back in history to learn some more about this. This will be a review for people who've seen this before, but it'll be new for some of you. In 1991, under Bill Vander Zalm, they had something called the Roundtable in BC. They sent around some experts to all the different communities in British Columbia, and they asked them, what does sustainable development mean to you? And at that time, they came up with this definition, that ensuring our use of resources in the environment today does not damage the prospect of their being used by future generations. Sounds pretty reasonable. But even at that time, it was mentioned that sustainable development is an oxymoron. You cannot sustain something and develop something at the same time. A little bit more history. In 1972, this fellow here, his name is Maurice Strong. He's a Canadian oil man. He's from Alberta. He ran the first United Nations Conference on Health and Environment in 1972. He was good friends with Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and he later went on to run become the CEO of Petro-Canada right before they ran the National Energy Program. And in 1976, we had something called Habitat 1 in Vancouver. In 1987, there was something called Our Common Future. It was a report that was commissioned by the United Nations, and that's where the term sustainable development came from. In 1990, there it is. In 1990, a group called ICLEI was formed. It's the International Committee on Local Environmental Initiatives. They were formed in 1990, and their goal was for 2 years to create a document that would be served up in 1992 at the Earth Summit. So there in 1992, 176 countries came together from all around the world at the Earth Summit, and there was a few things that happened there. One of them was they all signed on to something called Agenda 21. I'll tell you what that is. So here's Kamloops this week from 1992. It says here, Agenda 21 will be a blueprint for global sustainable development, which will extend into the 21st century. That's why it's called Agenda 21. So they're telling us that sustainable development will be, the blueprint for it is Agenda 21. In 1994, this is a document that was commissioned by the Council of Canadian Ministers of Environment, the CCME, and the FCM, which is the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. The FCM is a group that says they want to speak truth to power. For all those little municipalities, they get together and they speak truth to the federal government. But what it seems to be doing now is that they're taking policies from the United Nations and from the federal government, and they're actually delivering them down to the local municipal level. And here in this report from 1994, they say that it's a comprehensive blueprint for global actions to affect the transition to sustainable development. Something else happened there in Rio in 1992. This is from that same document by the FCM. There's something called the Rio Declaration, and they came up with some new doctrines of how governments around the world would do business. One of them says, to achieve sustainable development, environmental protection shall constitute an integral part of the development process. We have to do everything through the lens of the environment. Next, they say that states should reduce and eliminate unsustainable patterns of consumption. So we have to eliminate things that are unsustainable. And then they go on to say that the precautionary approach shall be widely applied, and lack of full scientific certainty shall not be used as a reason to not do sustainable development. So no proof is necessary. All of this can be summed up in the phrase that we're going to think globally and act locally. They want all the local municipalities in the world now to think about global problems at the municipal level. Just to drive the point home, this is another document from 1996. Here, this was published by ICLEI, that's the group I told you about that formed in 1990. And it was also paid for by the IDRC, which is the International Development and Research Center, which is funded by the Canadian government. It's a Crown corporation. The contact information on this for Canada is the FCM, just to show you that these organizations are involved in this and rolling it out. And they're telling us here that sustainable development is a program of action for local and global economic reform, a program that has yet to be fully defined. So even back then, they weren't really sure what it was. Quickly about ICLEI, it's a bit controversial. You can read lots about them on the internet, but if you go back to their very first founding document, this is from 1990, they say that their mission is that local governments must begin to restructure social and economic life at the local level. They go on to say that global problems can only be solved through restructuring of human society at the local level. So if you want to know what that organization was designed to do, it's designed to restructure your social and economic systems from the municipal level. But for some clarity, we could look at the Federal Sustainability Act. So this is at the federal level in Canada, under the federal government. This is the legal definition. They say here in the green box that sustainable development is based on the efficient use of natural, social, and economic resources. It's not just about the environment, it's about social, economic, and environmental resources. And they say that we have to integrate environmental, economic, and social factors into the making of all decisions. So it's everything. And then right after that, in the first point, they say that the principle of sustainable development is a continually evolving concept. So this is 30 years later, and they still haven't figured out exactly what sustainable development is. Nobody knows where it starts, nobody knows where it stops. That's the actual legal definition. So if we don't know what is sustainable, do we know what's unsustainable? It turns out we do. All of these things have been called unsustainable at one time or another. Automobiles, air conditioning, appliances, eating meat, suburban homes, fossil fuels, rural living, farming, fertilizer, flying. The list goes on. So we can see now that sustainable development is not just about the environment. So what is the modern definition of sustainable development? How many of the new people that are here tonight have ever heard of the Sustainable Development Goals? So it's not that widely known, but you can search on the Government of Canada website. It's not some fringe idea that I just picked up. The entire government is oriented around this idea. It's not a small idea, it's a very, very big idea that has filtered through every single policy of the government. And what I would describe it as is an integrated management and reporting system. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to roll out the policies, their sustainable policies, in 17 different areas, and they want to track and record and make sure that everybody's doing what they need to do. And those cover everything from policies on poverty, hunger, health, resources, energy, water, equity, gender, education, economy. It's basically everything. So this nice little circle here, this is the Sustainable Development Goal symbol. You can see there's our environmental minister, he's wearing the pin. You often see Justin Trudeau wearing the same thing and many other ministers. In all federal parties, by the way, it's not just the Liberals. And this is it's a bit hard to read, I'll read it out to you guys. This is a Venn diagram, and what it's showing you is the 3 pillars of sustainable development: environment, social, and economic. So the government has a plan for the environment, the government has a plan for social values, and the government has a plan for the economy. And the government planning and managing all those 3 things together in the middle is what they think sustainable development is. So you see, it's not just about the environment. But I'd like you to think for a moment what that concept really is, because it's a lot more than just thinking about the environment. What they're really telling you is that it's a government-managed environment, a government-managed economy, and a government-managed social values. So it's just government management of everything. That's really what it is when you break it down to the base idea.
You will own nothing and be happy.
So will sustainable development solve the problems that it set out to solve? So this is a picture of China. Those are all the emissions coming out of China and India, the developing world. They've got 1.4 billion people in China that are desperately trying to bring themselves up out of poverty to our middle class lifestyle. They're consuming energy and materials and resources like crazy. Their emissions are going through the roof. This chart here, this is 1994. This is 2022. You can see that their emissions keep rising. They're the #1 polluter in the world. This is a story from 2023. China is building 2 coal power plants a week. They're building 2 every week, okay? And I want to drive this home too. So we talked about that meeting in Rio in 1992 when there was a sustainable plan for everyone. You guys can't read that there. There's a little article clipping that's from the Vancouver Sun in 1994. I'll read it out to you. It says, China unveils a plan. China on Friday unveiled an ambitious plan to promote sustainable development, which will rely heavily on foreign money. Agenda 21 addresses how China, with the world's largest population of 1.2 billion and rapidly rising levels of both consumption and pollution, can realize its economic hopes without throwing the environment into chaos. That was 30 years ago. They've been doing sustainable development in China for 30 years. The environment has been destroyed in China. Their production is going through the roof. Their consumption of resources is going through the roof. The reason why I bring this up is to show you that China is not following the same plan that we are. We're on one standard and China is on a different one. And that's important because when you put this into context, the most important word I'll use tonight, context, this giant pink thing here, this is China's emissions in 2021. #1 in the world, more than 30%. This is a bunch of small countries put together. This is the United States. Here's India. They're coming up. And one of these little tiny red slivers, it's this one here. This is Canada. Okay? So the next time somebody tells you that you have to sacrifice your way of life or give something up for the environment, put it into context. Like, yeah, sure, everybody wants to do stuff for the environment, but should you really be giving up your way of life and your freedom and all these wonderful things? We have so much resources here in Canada. Why would we give all that up if China's not even following the game plan? And they're not. It's pointless.
How do we know that our government that actually follows that plan, you know, that it's gonna be any different? You know what I mean, like long term?
No, nobody knows. Why should we give up anything? It's not really proven. So what is climate action? This is goal number 13 from the SDGs. Basically what climate action is taking actions to reduce emissions. And what the UN says is that climate action is intrinsically linked to all 16 of the other goals, so they're all one and the same. We need to talk about the Paris Agreement. This is from 2015. And I want to show you that it's all political parties that deal with sustainable development. So this was under the Conservatives. This was, what's his name? Harper, thank you. Yeah, Harper was in power, and he signed us up for the Sustainable Development Goals. He pulled us out of the Kyoto Accord, and everybody was clapping. Then he signed us up for the Paris Agreement, which is 10 times worse. Then he signed us up for the Sustainable Development Goals. And how the Paris Agreement works is it goes in 5-year cycles. The first cycle was 2015. The second cycle was in 2020, which just kind of lined up with the COVID and the lockdowns there, so a lot of people didn't notice it. The third cycle will be in 2025. Each 5-year cycle, and I'll quote here, is a ratcheting up of ambitious, increasingly ambitious climate action. So right now our government is planning for the next 5-year cycle because we have committed to this. This is a legally binding treaty that Canada has committed to. And then they also tell us that, again, the words we like to hear, that it requires economic and social transformation. This isn't about the environment. It doesn't even say the word environment in here. So we're being told we need to make sacrifices on behalf of the world. Okay, what's happening is we're having collective rights of the world being compared to your individual rights. Those two things are different. You have individual rights in Canada. It's defined under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. There's the Bill of Rights and Freedoms. You have this stuff. It's written in black and white. You know where it starts, you know where it stops. But as soon as somebody says, oh, collective rights, you have to save the world, now we're into the same wishy-washy idea. Nobody knows where it starts. Nobody knows when it ends. Nobody knows when you're finished. Nobody knows when it starts. So if we go along with this line of thinking, we're basically writing a blank check for giving up our individual rights to save the world. There needs to be guardrails and limits. So just a quick recap. Agenda 21 is sustainable development. Everything we do must be sustainable because of the climate. The philosophy of sustainable development is that collective rights are greater than individual rights. We have to think locally, or think globally and act locally. Sustainable development cannot be defined, it's always changing. It's a new legal and legislative doctrine, there's no proof necessary. The plans were not conceived or written with Canadians' interests first. They were written by international consultants. Much of our modern life is considered unsustainable. It requires undefined economic and social transformation. It will result in government control and management of most things in your life, and it will not stop the next climate change crisis. It will not stop the next forest fire. It will not stop the next atmospheric river or heat dome. So, now let's talk about Kamloops. That's the context for this conversation. So this is how this manifests in Kamloops. We have something called the Community Climate Action Plan. There are 5 or 6 copies printed out on the table in the back. I highly recommend you take a flip through and you can verify what you're seeing on the screen here tonight. So in this Community Climate Action Plan, we're told that Kamloops needs to cut emissions, and there's 3 sources of emissions. Number 1 is automobiles and transport. Number 2 is homes and buildings, and number 3 is waste from the garbage dump. And tonight we're going to talk about number 2, which is housing. So emissions from housing comes from 2 main sources. And it has to, it's good, don't worry about it. It comes from two main sources. Number one is your water heater, and number two is space heating. So heating the whole house, that's the biggest draw on energy, and number two is heating the water that you use, so that's number two. So how can we reduce the CO2 emissions from housing? There's a few different ways. Number one, which is happening right now, is we can change the building codes and make them more efficient, change the requirements for new houses in the future. So when we build new houses, they won't be making as much emissions as the current and older houses. Number two, we can retrofit the older houses to improve their efficiency so they need less energy. Number three, we can switch to lower carbon forms of energy. So the big push now is to move from natural gas over to electricity to save the planet for carbon. And then we can also, as a last resort, we can just reduce the amount of energy demand from the homes. And that's called demand side measures, pardon me. So is a province banning gas? They absolutely are. It's in the BC Building Code. It's not net zero, it's zero carbon after 2030, okay? So fireplaces, appliances with gas, all that stuff is gonna be banned because it's not 100% efficient. That's at 2030. It's not in the building code now, it'll be in 2030.
I was just curious, what science is to back up the CO2 emissions that
What, let's save the questions till after. I got so many more slides to get through, and I don't want to give everybody a chance to talk. And this is what the BC step code looks like. You may or may not have heard about this. So what the step code is that every couple of years there will be increasing requirements in efficiency on new builds. This is not existing homes, this is new builds. So we had a recent step, which was in March of this year. We went to step number 3. The next will be 4 and then 5. Number 5 is zero carbon, and that'll be by 2030. And here we are on step number 3, which was a 20% improvement, and the end will be an 80% improvement over the original start, which was in 2019. And here, this is just down here at the bottom, it says in 2030, the BC Building Code will require all new buildings to be zero carbon, not net zero. That's from the press release.
There's no such thing as zero carbon. There's no such thing. That means
There's no such thing as sustainable development either. No.
we're being given a bunch of bullshit.
This is from the Community Climate Action Plan in Kamloops, and this is one of the areas that they've identified. So this is homes, existing homes. They say that buildings account for 29% of greenhouse gas emissions in Kamloops, and that we have to engage in aggressive retrofitting of the existing and older home stock to make them more energy efficient. And if your goal is to reduce carbon, that makes perfect sense, but maybe there's no context here. So let's put some context on it, and then we'll ask you guys if it really makes sense, okay? So here they have a plan. They say that by 2050, they're going to retrofit 2% of the houses every year, and then eventually all of them will be done. They want to reduce emissions by 50% from all the houses in Kamloops. And by the way, there's 20,000 detached homes here. So that'll be 400 homes per year that are going to be getting retrofitted to do 50%. If it's 100%, that's 800 homes per year. How are
they going to afford to do that?
Don't worry, you're going to pay for it. You're going to pay for it.
Bring it on.
Yeah. So what do they want you to do in a retrofit? Well, it depends. Not every retrofit is going to be the same. It could be something simple like switching from a gas furnace over to a cold weather heat pump, or it could just be as simple as blowing some insulation in your attic. But there's a whole complicated thing that's coming down the pipe. It hasn't been released yet. We tried to get it. The government's being very tight-lipped about it, but I'll show you what's being discussed at the federal level. So it could include, as you may know, the building code now has been updated. You have to include infrastructure for EV chargers, so that could be thrown in there. Updoing your R rating on your walls, fixing the attic, replacing the windows to 3-pane windows they want now. Okay, these are just some of the things I've read. So it's gonna cost a lot of money. If you can imagine 2 or 3 of those things together, you're looking at 20, 30, 40, 50, depending on the size of the house, could be
120, 130.
could be easily 5 figures, easily. So I'll give you guys the federal context. Where did this come from? So there's a legislation at the federal level called the Pan-Canadian Framework. And they came out with a report there, it's called the Final Report, Alterations to Existing Buildings. And there was a group, it's called the Joint Task Group on Alterations to Existing Buildings. Really boring name. And they came up with this, their mandate was to develop a model code for existing buildings to help guide energy efficiency improvements during renovations. Now I'll show you what they came up with. So they came up with voluntary triggers, okay? They were very specific. They must be voluntary, okay? Here they say that all proposed triggers are based on voluntary action by the building owner to alter the building. The idea is when an owner has decided to alter, upgrade, or change the function of a building, there could be additional requirements to improve the energy efficiency. So let me tell you what some of those voluntary triggers are going to be. Maintenance or repair or replacement of some of the systems in the home, like if your furnace needs maintenance, they might say, well, you've got to replace it with a heat pump. Change of occupancy, if you sell the house, or change of occupancy type. If you're a landlord and you have a rental, you've got a really good excuse why you can't do this because you're making revenue from your property. But if the tenants move out and somebody moves in who's living there, they're gonna say, well, you need to upgrade the house now. Addition or space reconfiguration. So anything that you go to the city that you need to pull a permit for, good chance that you're gonna have to do some of these alterations on part or all of the house, depending on what the job is that you're doing. This is their little diagram that they came up with.
Nice new world, even on the forum.
So here it says, existing buildings intervention. It's an intervention, they're intervening. And what's gonna happen is, they're gonna say, maybe if it's a small maintenance, you don't have to do anything. That's that little green box. Green's good, right? See these red boxes, that's bad. So here it says change of occupancy, decision point, boom. You've got to do an upgrade. It's either going to be a big red one or a small red one. You don't know. And we've tried really, really hard to find out exactly what is coming down the pipe. We've asked the city. They're aware of it. The guy who wrote that climate plan, who's responsible for that, he's aware of it. He spoke about it in council. CAO is aware of it. The city knows. Okay? But the way I look at it is the city thinks that it's not their job to be involved in this. They're just kind of like, well, that's the provincial government's jurisdiction, right? But we at the KCSC, we think that the city council should be advocating on our behalf. If this doesn't make sense for the people of Kamloops, if it's going to put us all into debt and it's not going to save the world, why are we doing it? They should be advocating for better ideas or advocating against this. So they said that they're going to release their final strategy in 2022. They never did. There's been a bit of a delay. I actually spoke with the housing policy guy today. I finally got a hold of somebody in the government after 2 weeks. And they told us they didn't release it because there's a new national building code being released, and they're going to align with the new national building code. So they're going to align everything federally across Canada, and all the provinces are going to follow suit, and that's what they're going to base the new building code off of. But they still have a scheduled release date for 2024.
Evictions?
And this is from the official community plan in Kelowna. Their community plan came out in 2022. They've already included it in their community plan, along with mandatory energy labeling. Now they want to label the energy rating on all the houses to shame you into getting something done on your house. And maybe your house will be less valuable, you'll get less money when you sell it because it doesn't have the right energy rating. Or it might actually be more valuable. We don't actually know how this is going to play out. It's going to be really interesting. So like I was saying, the National Building Code, it's still open for comment. by the Canadian Board of Harmonized Construction Codes. This is open until the end of December. I think you have till December 18th to comment on this. And this presentation with this link will be on our website later. You guys can check it out. So, how are you guys going to pay for these alterations that you don't need to do and you don't want to do? It's a great question. The government knows that a lot of you, young families in older houses, retirees, that you can't afford to do this. You don't have the income to do it. You don't have the savings. So they've come up with a program called PACE. It stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. And property assessed means that they assess your property and find out whether or not you have any equity in that property, and they're going to loan you money based on the equity. It's got nothing to do with your income or your credit score. But this is what a traditional mortgage looks like. This is first lien, second lien, third lien. So if you get a mortgage from the bank has first place lien because they've loaned the money against the asset. Okay, if you default, the bank has first crack to sell your house. If there's any equity left over, then your HELOC gets paid off, and then any other creditors after that. But to do this PACE program, the government wants first place lien on your house. Not entirely clear why they need to do that. So what's going to happen when they force everybody to upgrade your house? Rent's going to go up, utility costs for sure are going to go up, people are going to go into more debt, home prices 100% will go up, taxes, your property taxes will go up. That's what PACE is, that's how you pay it, it's through your property taxes. And what's this going to do is that home affordability obviously will go down and home ownership will go down because it will be more difficult to buy a house. So how does PACE work? Like I said, no credit score is necessary. It's all based on the equity in your home. PACE programs, and I'm reading word for word now from CleanBC. This is on the BC website. PACE programs link an energy improvement loan to a specific property through a municipal tax lien, and that's first place lien. The annual payments for the improvements are tied to the property, not the individual, and paid through local government property taxes. So instead of spending, like if you get a $500,000 house, your taxes are about $3,000 a year here in Kamloops. You know, if you take out a loan, it might be $6,000 a year you pay in property taxes. Okay?
Is this happening now?
It says on their website that they are doing this. They're going forward through this. They've already, I think they allocated $2 million towards this in 2019. And it's not clear where they are in the process, but it's definitely coming. So, again, context, guys. We need the context. Sounds like a good idea, but is it? So here I've got some amortization tables. There's a 15-year amortization. That's the length of the payback on the loan, and at the bottom is a 25. And there you can see if you borrowed $30,000 at a 5% interest rate, and by the way, no one in here is getting a 5% mortgage right now. The best you can get is maybe 6.5. They're all over 7 today. Yeah, mortgage rates are up. Interest rates are up. The Bank of Canada is 5.25 right now. Okay, no one's getting anything less than 5%. So this is generous already. So if you took out a $30,000 loan at 5%, you'd be paying $240 a month extra, okay, for 15 years to pay that off, and you pay $12,000 in interest. And now if you went for a 25-year amortization or a 30-year, then your payments would be about $180 a month, but you'd still end up paying an extra $23,000 in interest for that upgrade that you didn't really need to do. And when I look at my place where I'm living, if we look at natural gas for the year, it's about $1,400. Electricity is about $800. You put that together, you're looking at, I think it was $184 a month or something. No, it was less than that. 180 bucks a month is what it worked out to. And then after the upgrade, so say I get rid of my natural gas furnace, I put in a heat pump. Now my gas bill goes to 0, but my hydro bill goes up substantially. And I'm being very generous with these numbers, by the way. So say I go from $800 to $1,200 a year in hydro. So I've saved $80 a month in utility costs, but I've taken on an extra $240 in payments. So what they're going to do is market this to you as saying it's actually going to save you money. It's going to save you money. It's going to save you money. It's not going to save you any money. And again, here's some context. So these are different interest rates. This is for that $80 that I saved by doing that. There's a 1% interest. I could borrow $21,000 at 1% for $80 a month. But that ain't happening, guys. Interest rates are 7% today. If they were 3%, I could borrow 17 grand. If they were 5%, it's 13. And if they are what they are today, I could only borrow 11,500. That might cover your heat pump. Maybe. That's it. And all that's going to do is make your electricity bill go up. And here it says there's a little quote here from the Kamloops Climate Action Plan. It says that on average you'll save $970 per year, which is $80 a month. That's where these numbers came from. So they've been doing this PACE thing in California since 2012, I think it started. And there's a Department of Financial Protection in California that has a bunch of information on these PACE loans, because they were doing billions of dollars through them every year down there. And they said that what ended up happening was a lot of the contractors were misrepresenting to the homeowners that it's going to be free, don't worry, there's no cost to you, it's going to be fine. So people ended up with these big loans, and all of a sudden they got a big surprise when their property tax went through the roof. So that was one problem. They also tell you that PACE assessments can also make it more difficult to sell or refinance your property because there's a lien placed on your home. The lien has to be paid off, or you have to work out a way to transfer it. Now imagine if you're trying to sell your house and there's a $300 a month payment on that house. So the person who's buying that house, they have to qualify for financing, they have to get a down payment, and now the bank goes through and they see what their debt service is, and they have to take off another $300 because that's what it costs to live in that house. Plus they still have to pay utilities, right? It's going to reduce the amount of money and the amount of buyers that are going to be available for that house. And then, because you've done all those upgrades on that house, now the value of that house has gone up. Your property taxes are going to increase because the value of the house has increased. You see how that works? You have to borrow money to pay more tax, And then they also go on to say that homeowners who cannot afford it could lose their homes through a foreclosure action. So if you can't pay it, you could end up losing the house, and then the government would end up owning it. So maybe not the best solution, but this is what's coming. So is this being proposed in BC? Somebody asked the question. Absolutely yes. I could list off 30 different reasons why it's happening, but they've already dedicated millions of dollars towards it. They've already done the legislation in Alberta. Edmonton's doing it. I think Penticton's already doing something. And this is from CleanBC. It says the province will proceed with the next steps on a property assessed clean energy program. That's right on their website. Some other stuff in CleanBC after 2030, and this is, I quote, all new space and water heating equipment sold and installed in BC will be at least 100% efficient. So if you depend on a gas furnace, the most efficient gas furnace you can get is like 98%. It'll never be 100% because that's just not how that technology works, so that's gone. Best case is that you end up with a hybrid heat pump / furnace. Mandatory energy labeling, that's coming, that's in CleanBC. And in 2024, they're going to stop all existing subsidies from gas utilities. So right now, if you go buy the most efficient, most expensive, best gas furnace for your house, you actually get a couple $1,000 kickback from the government and from the utility. They encourage you to buy that nice one, the Energuide version. That's stopping next year. So the prices of furnaces are going to go through the roof next year.
That stops in 2024, like January?
I don't know the exact date, but I have it on a very high confidence it's going to be in 2024. Guys, I'm rushing. Am I going too fast?
No.
Okay. So now, again, we want to add some more context. So they're telling us we've got to get off natural gas. It's horrible. It's going to kill us all. The world's on fire. We got to save the world. But the question is, guys, do we actually have enough electricity? Can we electrify everything?
No.
Yeah, heat pumps are more efficient. They are. They're way more efficient energy-wise. They're not more efficient cost-wise. But this, just to give you some context, again, this is all energy. This is energy equivalent. So electricity, petrochemicals, biofuels, you can take all this together and it's an energy equivalent, okay? This is in joules. This is all the electricity we produce in British Columbia. It's 25% of the energy we use. That's it. okay? This is all the natural gas we use, and about 1/3 of that is for heating homes, okay? It's right there. And then the rest is industrial, and then you have diesel and gasoline and biofuels. So to replace all of that with electricity is probably not gonna happen in my lifetime. And just for perspective again, that's Site C Dam. It's about 5.1 terawatts or 5,100 gigawatts per year. And that'll come online in 2025. So here's BC, 150 years of energy development in this province. In 2021, we pumped out 64 terawatt hours of electricity. That's how much we produced. We maxed out that winter. If we replace the energy equivalent of all the gasoline sold in British Columbia, that's 41 terawatt hours. If we now add on all the diesel sold, that's another 22 terawatt hours, and we're at parity. Now if you add on all the heating for the homes, just the homes, not industrial, just the homes, that's another 22 terawatt hours on top of that. So you can take off 30, 40, 50, 60% of some of these numbers because of this new amazing efficient equipment that we're getting. But even so, there's no way, there's not another Site C Dam coming, okay? That Site C Dam was planned in, I think they first planned it in the 50s. They started, it stopped, it started again in the 80s, it stopped, they finally started it again in 2010, and now it's gonna be done in 2025. The chance that we replace all that, zero, it's not happening. But I say don't be so negative, guys, there's a way we can do this. And now I'm gonna show you what the government's planning and how they're gonna do it, because there's only one way to do this. So we could increase the power output, we could increase the capacity. We're not building any more dams, but we could build some windmills and some solar farms and some things. It's not really gonna replace that base load that we need. Whoops. We could increase the efficiency of houses, so that's why you see there's such a big push to do this. You understand now. We have to increase the efficiency of what we're doing. We could decrease the number of cars that are going to be converted to electric. We could decrease the number of kilometers they're going to drive. That's in a different presentation I do, but both of those things are government policy for the future. We can start getting into things called demand-side measures, where the utility starts to control when you can use electricity and how much you can use at certain times of the day. Another way to do that is make really expensive rates for certain times of day and make it really cheap to try and nudge you in your behavior to change. And then the last thing that they can do is come up with smart meters and smart appliances, where the utility actually has direct control of this. This is a demand-side measure, and this is probably going to be linked with a lot of these upgrades on your home. They're going to want you to put in the smart meter, put in a smart thermostat, put in smart appliances, so that when BC Hydro sees that the load is getting so high and there might be a service interruption, they can directly control the things in your house. That is called demand-side measurement, DSM, okay? And that is a real thing, and it's in the integrated resource plan for BC Hydro. I'm not making this up. So 2 years ago, BC Hydro put out something called the integrated resource plan, and they're required to do this. And then it's their plan for the next 10, 20 years of how they're gonna meet the supply demand. They look at all the dams, when they're gonna go offline, maintenance, new dams coming online, the projected economy, how many houses are gonna be, how much stuff is gonna be electrified. It's a pretty complicated thing that they do, and they come up with two forecasts. One is their baseline forecast. That's the current government policy that we're doing. From 2021 to 2023, they had to redo the integrated resource plan because they figured out that by 2027, we'd be out of electricity. And that's after Site C comes online. We'd be a net importer of electricity by 2029, and we'd be 3 terawatt hours or 3,000 gigawatt hours short by 2033. That's this number right up here. That's the baseline forecast, okay? That was everything kind of continuing on as it was 2 years ago. They also have another scenario. It's called the 2023 accelerated electrification load scenario. So this would be if, I don't know, the government changed the policy on electric cars, like they just announced 2 weeks ago, that 90% of vehicles must be by law sold zero emission vehicles in British Columbia by 2030. That just passed first reading, okay? It used to be 2040, now it's 2030, it's moved ahead. If, say, the government rolls out with a plan that we must change all houses over to electric heating, because it's 100% efficient, it's good for the environment, that would be accelerated electrification. So what does it look like if we go on that load scenario? Well, by 2028, we're 3 terawatt hours short, and by 2033, we're another 2.5 sites dams short in less than 10 years. That's the accelerated plan. So I don't know exactly where we are, but I know that the policies change from the government, and that's what BC Hydro uses to choose which path we're on. And I've asked them, they haven't gotten back to me, but when I find out, I'll let you know. But it seems to me like we're on the accelerated path, and it seems to me like we're gonna come up way short. And by the way, these numbers here from BC Hydro, very serious guys, engineers, they take into account something called energy purchase agreements, that we can purchase electricity from other states and other provinces. That's how the electrical grid works. Sometimes we power California, sometimes we buy it from coal power in Alberta. It's this whole mishmash, it's really complicated, power buying, selling. But they assume that we're going to have these same EPAs, energy purchase agreements, after 2026 when they all renew. But guess what? Every other jurisdiction is doing the same thing that BC is doing. We're all trying to electrify at the same time. So what do you think the chances are that these other locations are going to have the power that we need? Well, I'm thinking that the likelihood is starting to reduce, right? And if we do get that power, it's going to be coal-fired power from Alberta, which makes all this CO2 stuff just a bunch of nonsense anyways. Nobody's building any new hydroelectric dams. So the 2023 update they came out with from BC Hydro, they said, we have an energy and capacity surplus. I was like, oh, okay, good. I don't need to worry about nothing. It says I got a surplus. So I read on, and then they, qualifying language, right? I've got $1 million if you give it to me. You know what I mean? And they say here, BC Hydro is well positioned to serve our customers' province-wide electricity needs for most of the next decade. And then in orange, they say, with additional demand-side measures. So yeah, I've got a surplus of electricity to give you as long as you use less. I got lots. That's what they're saying. And here they say about how they can control the appliances. And here they say, in their own words, that additional demand-side measures would be bad for customers. It'll increase bills, increased risks. It'll mean time-varied rates for customers. And of course, just like the price on carbon, what do you think is the most effective demand-side measure there is? It's the price. So this argument always comes up. They say, well, when I switched to a heat pump, my bill went up. And they say, oh, don't worry, the bill will never go up. The electric bill will never go up. It's regulated by the government. That's true. It's regulated by the government. They set the price. BC Hydro is part of the government. They do what the government tells them to. But the government's telling them to make us all use less electricity. And what's the most effective way they can do that? Demand-side measures, increase the price. So when they get into a jam, that's what they're going to do. So all you people that are switching over now to electric pumps, thinking, well, it's not too bad. It's fairly, it's fairly efficient. Energy-wise, yes, but price-wise, soon to be no. Really quickly, guys, this is from the BC, the Business Council of BC. They have economists that work for them. They put out a report. They say that the government's own modeling shows its CleanBC plan will dampen economic growth and set BC's prosperity back more than a decade. So this is the projection on CO2 reduction. That first red dot is in 2 years from now, and the other one's by 2030.
It'll never come down.
CO2 is a great approximation for economic activity because it shows how much we're all consuming. This is the carbon tax. You can see it was going up by, it was $30 per ton, 35. I think we're currently at 65 here, 2023. And then it's gonna go up $15 a ton every single year until 2030. We're gonna be the most expensive place in Canada at $170 a ton. So everything's gonna get more expensive. And then these are the numbers. This is the part that blew my mind. This is for the report. Even the economist who made this at the Business Council, it blew his mind. It says so right in the report. These are the numbers from the NDP government's analysts in their CleanBC program. They do 66 pages talking about how great it is for the economy and the environment. And there's one little thing, this is their numbers, don't click on it. And he clicked on it, and this is what it says. It's super, super tiny, but basically the economy is going to go down by $28 billion per year by 2030. That's the economic effect. There's the chart. The blue dots there, these are the actual numbers. This is the projection if everything goes status quo. This is what the government's own numbers say. They're calling for GDP growth of 0.4%. They should be talking about this every single day on the news. This should be the #1 thing that we're all discussing. Like, per capita GDP is about to decrease for the first time ever. There it is, down to 0.4%. Yeah, it's like an economic depression, pretty much. So, guys, I know I talked really long. First time I presented this info, so I wasn't sure how long it was going to take. But I'll just do a quick summary. Sustainable development means basically government control of everything. That's what it means. Social, economic, environment. They've got a plan for everything. Mandating the CO2 cuts is going to cause economic stagnation from their own numbers, from their own plan. $28 billion. Electrifying everything in BC will cause energy shortages from BC's own numbers. You can see it. We're already short. They've got a call for power out for 2027. They need another 4,000 gigawatt hours. That's on the baseline plan. Enforcing these energy upgrades on homes, guaranteed, will increase property taxes. That's by design. That's how the program works. It's going to reduce your sellability for your home, and it's going to increase costs and reduce home ownership. So we have competing things here. What's more important? We're in a housing crisis. Is having cheap homes more important than saving the world, even though it's not really going to save the world? I would say having cheap homes is more important. None of this is going to stop climate change. Solutions? What can we do? So this is the idea when Justin and we came up with the KCSC, is how we could do this. We see a way that locally, grassroots, we can come together and affect change on this. Part of the problem right now is that the council, like Justin was showing, is influenced by the federal, provincial government. You can even hear when you watch the council meetings, some of the councillors, they push back. They're like, well, the provincial government wants us to do this and the federal target is that. They're not talking about what is the Kamloops local people target. Yeah. That's what they should be talking about, but they're looking at their job as implementing policies coming down from above. And if you're surrounded by that every day, then that's probably what you think your job is, but we think their job is to advocate for us. So there's a way we can do this, and the biggest problem right now is that the official community plan for Kamloops only looks at development. The development plan is in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, in line with Agenda 21, in line with this Paris Agreement, cutting emissions. It's all in alignment with the federal, provincial government, and it's only concerned with that. So what we need to do is change that plan. It's doing everything through the lens of sustainability, but why isn't it also considering your rights as a homeowner, your right to privacy, your right to mobility, your right to your house, your right to have an affordable place to live, have affordable utilities? If it's not considering those things, it's going to end up with a bad result in those areas. So what we're saying is we should target the OCP, and where practicable, safe and effective and agreed upon by the community, then we can start to do those changes that are going to be good for the environment. But not unless the community's been informed properly. Like we're trying to do now is tell you what's really happening, because they won't talk about it at City Council. And that the city should recognize the rights of citizens to privacy, mobility, property ownership, etc. If that was in the OCP, then they would have to consider those things before they could roll out these policies, unlike what they're doing now, which is just rolling them out. And then at the very last resort, if council refuses to listen, then we could always vote in a Kamloops First council that understands these issues and why they're important to the people of Kamloops. But I suspect the more that we talk about this and the more people find out about what's really going on, that the council will start to listen, and they will listen very acutely to what we have to say. And that is it. Thank you very much. Are you gonna moderate? I'll do it. So now the whole point of the open house was, I see we only got about 20 minutes left. It ran a little bit late tonight. We want to give you guys a chance to kind of mingle, get to meet the other members of the KCSC, talk to myself and Justin, and of course we want to take some questions. So why don't we just do a quick 10 minutes of questions if anybody's gone?
I got a question. Do you have paper copies of what that presentation was?
I'll put it, it'll be online on the website. All the members will receive an email with this presentation with the video and the PDF copy attached.
Thank you.
Just quickly on your last slide, Jim, what does OCP stand for?
OCP stands for the Official Community Plan. It's legislated. Every single city has to have an OCP. It's like the overarching bylaw that all of the plans must be in alignment with. So for instance, the Community Climate Action Plan is mentioned in the OCP, so they have to be in alignment. If you try and do something that's not in alignment with that, you can't legally do it.
All right, so if, supposed to work.
I was just gonna start taking questions. Yes, sir.
Oh, so we're not gonna do it the same thing?
Supposed to do it that way.
Well, taking questions, are you getting people to line up for them?
Carbon tax money. So carbon tax is supposed to be revenue neutral, where, yeah, it's a little bit murky. I actually wanted to put that in this presentation, but I wasn't able to get the details on it. But basically the money goes to the provincial government, and then the provincial government is supposed to give you that money back. Right, so they're changing your behavior by taxing certain things, and then they're supposed to refund it back to you. It's supposed to be revenue neutral, but I think we all know intuitively that it's not really. And even on, for instance, your gas bill, you'll see the carbon tax, and then there's another charge on there. I saw it today, which is the CleanBC surcharge. So they're charging you extra money for CleanBC stuff on top of the carbon tax. And then you also have to pay GST on top of that as well.
Yeah.
So you're getting double, triple taxed in some instances.
Jeff, you're going to ask your question?
Are we just asking questions, yelling them?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
What about churches and schools?
What about churches and schools? Okay, so there is a plan for that. It is addressed in the building code. I don't have all the details right fresh in my mind, so I don't want to say something that's not correct. But I know it is discussed, and there will be something to address that, because it's not just going to be for residential houses. It'll also be for commercial buildings, which would include churches and schools. Government-owned buildings, that's probably the first thing that will get done. So in the city's climate action plan, everything that's owned by the city will be net zero neutral, including the buses, cars, everything will be EVs by 2030. That's part of their plan.
It's our tax money that basically pays where it goes. They're paid, their wages are paid by us, and any retrofits that it comes back. It's our money.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't come from a magical place. We all pay for it in the end. You're absolutely right.
We're gonna pay for all the buildings, and then we're also gonna pay for our own.
Yeah. Yeah, like businesses will likely have to pay for their own upgrades. There's gonna be grants available. If you guys look, there's already some stuff like CleanBC or Clean Home grants. So if you wanna switch to a heat pump, there's probably a few $1,000s available to you. That's gonna be there, and there's federal programs, there's provincial programs. And if you're smart and you can kind of work it in the right way, you might be able to work something that's gonna be beneficial to you. But if you end up, I don't know, selling your house in 2 years and says, oh, change of occupancy, that triggers the new code, well, we're gonna have to retrofit the whole house. And you end up with a $100,000 rental, what are you gonna do?
What about somebody who loses their home to a fire, for instance?
And then insurance will have to pay for a brand new $1 million house when it should have been a brand new $600,000 house.
Yeah.
It's good for that person, but I don't, that's a great point, like, why would the insurance industry go along with this? Who's gonna cover that cost? These are questions that nobody's
We are.
answered.
Again, we are, because then our insurance goes up in price.
Did that answer your question, ma'am? Does anybody else have any more questions? Jeff?
Yes, Jeff. I've been listening all along, and
People can't hear.
yeah, well, if we had
Right.
something to talk to, does it? Yeah, I don't think it's here.
Working a little bit. but-
We're having technical difficulties,
Can
crowd.
you hear?
Let them put it up to the front.
I can yell. I'll stand up
Or use that one.
or use this one. Maybe I'll pull something off.
Okay, Jeff.
Okay, am I speaking too loud now?
No.
I just wanted to thank these guys for putting on this town hall meeting. I think it's one of the best things that's come down the pipe. I get more information here than I get anyplace else, so thanks a lot, guys. One of the things that Justin brought up earlier, it's never been explained to some of the people, especially the newer people, is how the non-governmental associations, organizations, fit into this whole plan. You've talked about how we're, as a group, going to talk in our areas. We're from Barrier, by the way, and your politics are a little different than ours, but we're planning on having a town hall there based on what Jeff and Justin have got together. But the NGOs, or non-governmental organizations, are lobbying our municipal and our provincial politicians constantly in order to bring in their agenda. And if truth be known, the Agenda 21, sure, it's coming from all these agencies, Agenda 30, 2030, Agenda 2050, they're all from non-governmental organizations. If you really look at where they're coming from, the WEF and the UN and et cetera, et cetera. So what I want to know is, how are we going to address, we can address our counselors, we can get a good group together and more people, the better. Get your memberships in there, folks. But how do we address these non-governmental organizations? You've said it yourself, they're taking over huge percentages of our land, they're looking for more. I know that you're trying to stay away from that type of reasoning, but at the same time, we have to address these people. We have to address the money that they're sinking in as non-governmental organizations. So you brought it up. I'd just like you to explain it a little more if you could. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, that's a good question. So I think what Jeff is alluding to, there's something right now, how many people have heard of 30 by 30? Okay, 30 by 30, go put that into Google when you get home. 30 by 30. Okay, 30 by 30 means 30% of all land in Canada will be conserved by 2030. That's also part of the 2030 plan. Just type it into Google, you'll be surprised. It's all over the federal websites, it's not a secret. But again, you would wonder, why aren't they leading with this on the news every day? Pretty substantial. Because right now in BC, I think we're only 17% of the land is conserved, if you include all the parks, and then NGOs like Jeff was talking about. And that's a lot of land they're gonna have to conserve in the next 6 years. How are they gonna do that? And once land is conserved, you can't use it for farming, you can't use it for any kind of development uses, it's just gonna be sustained. And the way that they do it, you can look at, there's a biosphere reserve out on Kamloops Sound, the War in the Woods, if anybody remembers that back from the late 80s there. Huge thing, all over the world, everybody talked about it. What they do is they set the conservation area, and then there's a buffer zone, and then there's the transition area. Normal people like you and me, we can only work and live and do stuff in the transition area, and it can only be within sustainable principles, which are sustainably developing. So you can't sustain and develop at the same time, so you'll just be sustaining. And then if you have a special right, like your logging company, then you can work in some other certain areas. But I think what he's talking about is how are we gonna reference this? And I think really this is just one of the things of sustainable development. It's just one thing. Like I could talk for hours and hours and hours. If I picked every single topic, there's so much there that would shock you. And it's all there on the government websites. You can read all about it, and it's all just a normal matter of business. But nobody's talking about it. So what are we gonna do? And the plan is to, really, you have to have a grassroots movement, just like they did with the War in the Woods in Kamloops Sound 35 years ago. The people there said, we don't want this industrial logging, it's screwing up the water and the fish. And then there was a battle back and forth between the people that lived there and the farmers and the people that lived off the land. But you know, they kind of conserved it. But I guess this would be the opposite. We need to have a grassroots movement and moving back up and saying, we need our land. We need our land for supporting farmers. We need our land for recreational use. We need our vehicles to drive and enjoy that freedom, because giving that up is not going to save the world. Like factually, physically, objectively speaking, it's not going to save anything. So why are we giving it up? And what's the hit going to be to the economy? We're all going to be living in this kind of brown bag economy life where we don't have all the things we have today. Do you think in the future, when they're worried about all these CO2 emissions and everything, that you're going to get your avocados from Mexico? Is that even going to be allowed? Okay, well, you know, so I guess I don't have the answer. How are we going to deal with these NGOs? But the first thing is just talking about it and showing people what's in black and white. It's like Jeff was saying, we could allude to other things. I could talk to you about who is behind this and whatever. I don't know the answer. Nobody does. But we can see what's here in black and white. It's written right here. It's on the government websites. It's in your city plan. So let's just talk about that. And the more we talk, the more people we're going to get involved, and people are going to start to listen.
Jeff, start local.
Start local.
That's where we start.
Yeah, we have to start local. It has to be a local movement. And just one other idea, if you zoom out 30,000 feet, we talk about jurisdictional boundaries here a lot. You've got the federal government's responsible for certain things, jurisdictionally, the provincial, the municipal. Say you vote the guy that you want in federally, whoever that is, does every single policy that you want exactly, and you say, come save us here in Kamloops. He's gonna turn around, or she's gonna say, I don't have jurisdiction. That's really nice, but that's up to your province, okay? And you can see this right now. All the premiers were just meeting in Nova Scotia. They are pissed because the federal government is trying to deal directly with the municipalities. It's a big no-no. They don't have the jurisdiction to do that. So Justin Trudeau is getting swatted right now by all the premiers. And then same thing, imagine if you vote in the #1 guy or girl provincially and you say, come and save me here in Kamloops, BC. They don't know what they're doing. None of this makes sense. Come and save me. They can't do it because they're going to say, well, that's really nice, Jeff, but I talked to your mayor and your councilors and they sent us, we were at the UBCM last week and they all voted for more sustainable development. And they've been doing that for 30 years. Why would we change anything? I know what you're saying, but that's not what your representatives are telling us. So it has to start locally. It has to start here at the grassroots level. It has to go up through the council. It has to go through UBCM to provincial and then federal. That's the only way we're ever going to change anything. And that's a super long answer to your question, but I hope that makes sense.
All right, thank you very much.
I think. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I've been to the city council meeting, and we were told, you voted in, so we can do it. You know that? And I was there with this lady, Judy was with me, and I think yeah, and I'm telling you, that's the truth.
What did they say?
They can do whatever they want to, it's because we elected them. But we didn't elect CAO, We didn't elect the CEO, and all the rest of them are sitting out there. They're listening to all the CEOs. We did not elect them, they were appointed. Just to let you know.
Thank you. I think what we'll do, it's getting late. I didn't expect this would run so long unless we have like one more question, and then we'll just open it up for meet and greet. Yeah, go ahead.
It's not really a question, but just to answer Jeff's question from the barrier here.
You gotta come closer.
I gotta come close, because
You gotta stand up here.
gotta stand up here, okay? Just 2 years ago, I got involved with the climate change people here in Kamloops, because climate change is here to destroy the planet. Just joking. So my idea was to get involved with these climate change people and get to know them. There's, in Kamloops, you have the BC Sustainable Energy Association, and I joined them 2 years ago. There were about 9 people. They folded about 6 months ago or a year ago. They went down to 5 people. So now it's the group in town is the Transition Kamloops. It's not about sex changes, but they're a group of about 20 people, and they're the main drivers of that group are a couple professors from the university, of course. Read between the lines. But these are things you can do. You can get involved with these climate change people, listen to them, get to know them, leave in your little hints about what CO2 really is. Try to be passive about it, because you're dealing with people that have sensitivities. They don't like to read, they don't like to research, they like to watch TV. But these are things you can do. These are the groups in Kamloops that are kind of there to back up the city a little bit. They are kind of a little bit weak, but I see, like, there's 100 people here tonight, or 80, I don't know. If even 5 of you joined and just sat and take part in their Zooms, there's usually about 50 to 100 people for the province-wide groups, like the We Can puts on Zoom meetings. In the Okanagan, it's called First Things First Okanagan. Get involved with them. They bring in speakers, they have Zoom meetings, you can chat, talk to people. I've already met 2 people that were so scared about climate change, they converted their house with electric pumps, what do you call those, heat pumps. Wonderful things. They got rid of their natural gas, and they're so happy to have paid about $1,000 a month when the cold weather came last winter. They were shocked because they bought into it, but they're not vocal enough really to say anything about it. I got this information just by getting to know them. So get involved with these groups if you can. There's a group out of Dalhousie University called Reclimate. They put on Zooms constantly with weird topics by weird people. But these are the people that sort of are influencing the government, and these are things you can do.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna shut it down. It's getting late. This is the point of the night where I ask you all very kindly, if you guys appreciated this, if you wouldn't mind leaving a small donation. We do all this off of donations. This costs money. Putting this takes time. We send out advertisement stuff. It costs money. We don't make any money from this. This is definitely a money-losing endeavor, but if you do have $5 kicking around, I'd ask you really nicely to make a donation. And please, if you guys agree with this or you want to know more, please take some time and sign up for a membership with the association. And with that, I'll shut it down, and happy to meet you all face to face. We'll be doing another meeting in another couple of weeks. Thank you very much.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's good. I just looked at it now. I said, people recognize it.
He's an engineer.